Has anyone ever been visited by the feds for going on this site? Or are there stories of stuff like that happening, mostly just paranoid anons? For going on the site, not for visiting 4chan, but I wrote a mean email to George W. Bush when he was running for re-election in 2004 and was visited by a few Secret Service agents. By mean, I mean overtly threatening. I was specific too, mentioning the Bush family and everything. No, I'm not an internet keyboard terrorist. Let me provide some context. B14. Saw a campaign email pulled up on my friend's parents' computer. Decided it would be funny to reply, saying all kinds of crazy stuff. Sent it. Think nothing of it. A month or so later, get a call from my friend's mom saying the Secret Service is there, asking about the email. Fuck. Tell my dad. He says I'm stupid and I need to own up to it when they get here, so they will just say I'm a kid screwing around. They come to my house. 3 black cars, black windows. 2 of them get out of only 1 car. They have backup. They come in and start talking to me, asking me questions that were purposed to assess my mental state. Have you thought of harming others or yourself? Do you see hallucinations? That kind of stuff. They are apparently convinced I was indeed some stupid kid screwing around and wasting their time. They shame me for doing something so stupid, and I felt shamed. They tell me I will be on a list and I will never be approved for a security clearance, and if I were to go into the military, there is a maximum rank I can achieve. They leave. I later went to his inauguration. I had been to the first one too, in a school trip, and my group was denied entry. I secretly knew why, but I did not tell any of them because I was embarrassed. One kid was bawling his eyes out because he didn't get to see his hero, George W. Bush. Sorry, man. To the agents reading this, I'm definitely a good boy now. You already know that though. I forgot to say, they took my prints and took a picture of me before they left. Interestingly, the camera was a Polaroid. 12 years ago, I was warned by staff in the OZ, Federal Attorney General's office, that a forum I was on was under surveillance by a political team within their department. Never was raided or anything, but I am squeaky clean, apart from shit posting on here. A guy I know who was pulled off an international flight by the feds imported laser pointers, ordered before the ban. They arrived after, subsequently had his house entered twice, but nothing taken. Persistent Wi-Fi network, ASIO van near his house. Called in for interview twice, if I recall correctly. Basically, he's a big mouth and a repeat minor party Senate candidate, so he's on their list. A guy I know in the USA was one of the first elite hackers and a militia member. 20 years later, he is a father of 6, including adopting a couple, the largest landlord in his town, runs a secure cloud designed to survive a nuclear strike, and does penetration tests on Fortune 500 companies. He funds the local school and is friends with the sheriff. The state police had him out of the car and prone him at gunpoint whenever he is pulled over. And when Obama was in the nearest city, there was a black Suburban parked outside his house. Once you are listed as armed and dangerous, you never get off it. The forum we chat on is private. It was used for strategy of the Heller case, among other things. The admin effectively told us he had received a national security letter requiring him to turn over data when he heavily suggested we go to Tor and consider everything we ever said on there as being public. So yes, surveillance is real, but they keep it low-key until you start spouting off in public and mention guns. Not exactly, but they did figure it out. Be me. Be early 2016. Had a restraining order on me because of a misdemeanor battery charge. I got into a fight with my ex's new boyfriend. Didn't get rid of my rifle that I built from 80% receiver. Ex tips off the courts that I have rifle. 6 Department of Justice special agents at my house. They take me into custody and ask me where the rifle is. Tell them, cause I don't want them to toss the house. So on. Where did you learn to build a rifle from an 80%? Begin to say the internet when he guesses. K on 4chan. Yeah, I say. Bewildered that a 40-something fed knew exactly where I learned how. Super freaked out, thinking all of those fed memes were real. Nothing ever came of it though. They did not bring it up again or in court. get charges dropped from prohibited person's possession of a firearm, felony, to misdemeanor probation violation due to length of time between restraining order and arrest. Cleaned up trash on the side of the freeway for 14 days. Years ago, I was involved with various anti-globalist groups and with the ecologist movement, but later left when they changed their policies. There was a bunch of demonstrations over a short period of time. When I was attending one, I used to be the guy in charge of taking photos to make us look like glorious heroes of the revolution. The first times, everything went well. We were only dealing with regular cops who were making sure that the demonstrations would not turn into chip-outs. But eventually, as more and more people got involved, some strange black cars started to show up. Once, I was followed by one of them in a street as I was walking back to my car. It was slowly driving by my side with fully dark-tinted windows. I was under the impression that they were simply curious because I had a suspicious backpack that was filled with photography gear. It turned out that after that day, every time I would show up at a demonstration, there would be some gray men in regular civilian cars taking pictures of me. Anyways, eventually the whole movement died down, and I never saw any of these people again. It might sound a bit anticlimactic, but I suppose that they have some sort of dossier about me somewhere. So yeah, keep in mind that as soon as you start to get involved in something politically incorrect, they will document who you are, just in case. If I recall correctly, Edward Snowden revealed the NSA collects data about the fetishes and porn viewing habits of suspected radicals so that they can be used as blackmail material later. You think they only blackmail radicals? I bet they've got files on everyone. Some kid today will be blackmailed in 20 years by the deep state feds when he's elected into public office because he spanked it to fake incest porn one time when he was 14. You think you live in a democracy, but under the surface is leverage, and leverage is where the real power lies. I set up a website probably around 6 or so years ago. It was pro-Julian Assange and anti-intelligence agencies. I wrote a few pieces on the matter. I was definitely being followed. One day at work, I had a guy come in and just stare at me constantly with a slight smirk for about 10 minutes. He was probably mid-40s, bald with a long beard, a bit of a potbelly, and covered in tats. I eventually went over to him and asked him if he needed help. He replied no, and I go to walk away, and he asked me who I was. I asked him why, and he said he already knew who I was. That was unnerving. Then, after a few seconds of silence, he asked me what else I did. I said I studied, and he said he knew. Then he just smiled and walked away. After leaving work, regardless of time, there was always an unmarked black hole in there which subsequently followed me home. This happened for about 2 weeks. Occasionally, I'd quickly try to take an unexpected turn to try and evade it, and they would just turn around and follow me. One time, I did evade them, but they ended up driving past my house as I parked the car. They would always make sure to drive past my house. It was either me writing about Assange or the fact that I was hanging out with a couple of weed dealers around that time. The most true statement here. There is a digital file somewhere with everything about you. In it contains more about you than you know about yourself. They have every cell phone number, text, email, all your friends, their friends, family, etc., etc. Your likes, dislikes, profiles on behavior, past and predictive, every place you go, travel times and modes of travel, how long you were there and how often you go, who else was in that location, prior and after, browsing habits, sexual preference, political affiliations, any activist groups you may be part of, bad habits, do you lie, cheat, steal, your weaknesses and desires. A list of things that could grant leverage over you. The only question is, who has access to it and who can use it? Today and in the days to come, it is quite the beast. I've had mysterious people enter the garage of my childhood home uninvited in the middle of the night. Garage was closed, meaning they hacked the garage door opener. CD/DVD tray of my laptop opens without any stimulus after posting about Project MKUltra and other government subversion programs. Wi-Fi network named FBI mobile HQ that follows me around town. It is always in my list of Wi-Fi networks. Random people approaching me at school, asking me to take a survey. I decline and follow them around for a while. I've never seen them asking anyone else about a survey. Gang stalking is real. It's not just schizophrenia. I've had the same car that two plainclothes, middle-aged men ride around in stop in front of my house quite a few times and stare. Twice, just as I was getting home. Both times, they drove off before I could get out of my car. Had two tires just barely punctured as to slowly let air out without me knowing. Either the feds or something they should be looking into, probably. This has been happening for over 6 months. Yes, I've made posts on this board that made me look like an imminent mass shooter. Tennessee family experiences lots of unsettling, unexplained phenomena. About a year ago, I moved my family and I to a home way out in the woods in Tennessee. I wanted to be brief here, but I need to get this off my chest. And after looking into this matter a little more, I have a lot more details that I think will paint a clear picture in the end. So please, bear with me. The nights here can be extremely loud. Between the crickets, the tree frogs, and the cicadas, it can almost be deafening. One night, not too long after we moved in, I had forgotten something in my car and headed outside to get it. The first thing that struck me as odd was that my dog would not go outside with me. My dog goes everywhere with me. I am her whole world. But not this night. As I held the door open, she looked out, and then looked up at me like nope. So I walked out and shut the door behind me. The second thing that caught me off guard was that there was not a peep. It was dead silent. Still, I shrugged this off and walked down my front steps and headed down to my car. When I had gotten about 10 feet from my car, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I felt as though something was watching me. I looked around but saw nothing. After I reached in my car for what I had forgotten to grab earlier, I had this feeling like something was moving towards me. I took a step back and checked around me. All of a sudden, I heard one of my hedges next to me that lined the walkway to our front door rattle. At first, I thought it was a rabbit that I had spooked, as I had seen one just earlier in the day, right where this was. A few seconds later, I heard the sound of a large rock, about the size of a cantaloupe, landing a few feet away from me. It hit the walkway and bounced into a shrub. I drew my gun and called out and said, "Whoever that this was is about to be shot." After a few seconds of nothing, I began to think that maybe this was some local teenagers messing with the new people. I holstered my sidearm, turned, and started walking back to my front door. Almost as soon as I turned towards my house, I heard this deep panting sound. It sounded like a huge dog, but what made me note back to my front door was that it sounded like it was right behind me. I leapt up onto my porch, turned, and drew my gun again, expecting something right there, but again, there was nothing. A couple weeks later, I was on my porch at night, sitting on a bench with my wife. She got up and walked inside to get something, and as soon as she shut the door, I heard that panting sound again. I could not see anything, yet this sounded like it was right on top of me. The sound was coming from everywhere, and it was very loud. Again, I could not see anything, so I noped it back inside my house. Now, at this point, I was questioning moving here, but after nothing else really happened, I let it go. A month or so later, it was a really rainy and stormy night. This is around 9 p.m., and my wife and I enjoy listening to the rain and talking about how relaxing the rain is. Me, growing up in Oregon, loved the rain, and for the past 10 years, we lived in Vegas, where it would dump the entire year of rain in a day, then be bone dry for the rest of the year. For my wife, who grew up in Nevada, rain was such a rare thing She loved going outside and watching the rain. So, for us, this is an enjoyable experience. Except this night in particular, things took a weird turn. As we were sitting there, talking about the rain and relaxing, my wife stops me and said, "Did you hear that?" I said, "No, what did you hear?" She said, "I swear it sounded like a small child calling for help, out in the woods beside our house." I said, "No, I didn't hear anything." After a few moments of us listening intently, she said, "There it is again." I said, "I didn't hear a thing, sweetie." "You sure you're not just hearing things?" She looked at me offended that I did not hear anything and said, "No, I am positive. How could you not hear that? It was our son. I think he's out there and got lost." I said, "No, he's sleeping on the couch." We then both looked for the blinds that were open right behind us, and we could see all of our children laying there. She said, "That's so weird. I swear it sounds like our son." I said, "Well, it isn't him. He's right there. Besides, I don't hear anything." She then stands up and says, "Wow, he's really crying out for help. I need to go look for him." Now, at this point, if you knew my wife, you would know she is absolutely creeped out by the woods and wouldn't be caught dead walking into them during daylight, much less at night during a storm. I grabbed her hand and said, "I have been listening intently, and there is absolutely nobody calling out for help. You need to stay here." At this point, I am getting worried about her. She was acting completely out of character, not to mention that at this time, she is 8 months pregnant with our baby daughter. She then says, "What if there's some child out there, lost in the woods?" I said, "Well, first off, I would be able to hear them too. Secondly, there are no other kids around here for miles, and the odds of them being lost 100 feet from our house that's lit up like a Christmas tree is nil." She then says, "I know, but what if it is a kid?" Before I could say anything else, she stands up and starts walking toward the stairs. I jumped up and grabbed her hand again and said, "No, you are not. Get in the house. I don't know what's going on, but you need to go inside." She then complies, and we both go inside. I didn't know what this was, but it freaked me out. A few months after this, just as it was getting dark outside, I heard the front door to our house open, and I got up to investigate. We have autistic 6-year-old twins, and we have the door set up so that they can't open it without us there. So to hear this sound, it could only be my wife. What was weird was the fact that she usually does not go outside without saying something to me. I walked out front and saw my wife walking down our private road towards the drive on the side of our house. I asked her what she is doing, and she says she was sitting on the back patio and kept hearing a baby crying out in the woods. I said, "Seriously? And you just decided to walk off into the woods to investigate?" She then looks out into the woods and says, "See? There it is again." Again, I can't hear anything, but what I did notice is that it was completely silent out again. I told her, just like before, the chances of a baby being out in the woods, outside our house, is slim, and that she needed to get back in the house now. She said, "What if someone left a baby out there?" I said, "Well, if that were true, I would hear it too." Now, at this point, I was really starting to worry about my wife's mental health. I actually asked her to see a psychiatrist, and she did. Now, looking back, I feel really bad about this, knowing what I know. A key to this moment was that my wife had just given birth to a baby girl a month before. A few days after this, we were out on the front porch. It is early evening, and I had just mowed the lawn this day, and our 3-year-old son was riding around on his little car in front of the house. Now, he knows that he is not allowed outside of a certain area that we met tough. He loves playing outside, but with the road behind 50 feet from our front porch, we have to be careful, as a lot of boaters will fly through after drinking all day on their boats. As we are talking, we are both keeping an eye on him. A neighbor drives by and stops to say hello for a second. This interaction took approximately 8 seconds, as all they said were, "How are things?" We said good, and he told us he would stop by later, as his wife got something for the kids, who happens to be one of their teachers in school, and we said, "Okay, great," and he drove off. I looked over where our son was, and he was gone. I called out his name and ran over to the side of the house and could hear his car on our side drive. I scolded him for leaving the area, and he said something in his 3-year-old gibberish and pointed to the woods behind our house. I told him that he had 5 seconds to get back up to the front of the house or else, and he adamantly pointed back in the direction of the woods and kept trying to tell me something. I looked off in the direction of the woods and just assumed he saw a deer or a squirrel or something and wanted to see it up close. I walked him back up to the front of the house, and he cried the whole way there. He got really upset that I would not let him go into the woods, but I just wrote this off as him being curious, and most 3-year-old boys are. Now, this instance is not isolated, as our twins have done similar things, but nothing quite as extreme as this. There have been nights where we had just laid down for the night and heard a loud bang on the side of our house, on the wall behind our bed. It was so loud that I jumped up and looked out the window. Our floodlight had come on, but I could see nothing. Now, the weird part about this is that our bedroom sits about 12 feet from the ground level, as we have a full-size basement that's cinder-blocked. I put on my slippers and grabbed one of my 12-gauge shotguns and walked outside to investigate. It was dead silent again. The floodlight that's on the side of the house had clicked off at this point, so I walked over to the end of the deck and shined my light around the yard. There was nothing. I walked around the house and shined the light around intently. As I approached the back side of my house, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It felt like someone was watching me. I shined the light up in the trees, but again, nothing. I rounded the corner, and the first thing I noticed was that my 3 dogs that were in their area were not making a peep. Now, our dogs have no filter and will bark at anyone and everyone. This includes me, so to see them all hiding with their tails between their legs, not making a peep, really had me worried. As I kept walking, all of a sudden, the crickets and frogs started making sounds again. It was as if someone had clicked a switch. I walked back into the house and told my wife that I had not seen anything. She shrugged and said okay, as long as our dogs were okay. Due to the circumstances that night, I decided to let the dogs in and sleep with us. The very same thing has happened on all 4 exterior walls of our house. It's random and annoying, but just like this instance, every time there was nothing going on outside. There have also been times where we were sitting in the house, and as I was watching a movie, my wife walked over to me and said, "Did you call me?" I said no, and she said she swears she heard me call her name in her ear. She said that it was definitely my voice, but she did not understand because it sounded so close, and I was a good 20 feet away from her in my recliner. The important part to this was that she was sitting at the table, doing something, and the slider to the backyard was open behind her. Now, our back patio sits about 20 feet off the ground, and is like a balcony, as it has no stair access outside. I think the previous owner built it to be a barbecue. There have been several instances where she would say she heard someone whisper in her ear, but she could not make out the sound. Again, I kept thinking she was going crazy, but as you will see, I think all of this tied into this final moment where things are revealed. The last thing I want to mention before we get into what just happened is that I have a shooting range built behind my workshop on the opposite side of our property, next to the main road. It is kind of on a downslope, but works perfectly for what I need it for. The range itself is cut straight into the woods, going down about 100 yards or so. When you're down at the range, you have woods surrounding you on all sides, except back up to my shop. I have to say, it has always felt creepy when I am dealing with my targets or mowing. When you are down there, it feels like you are miles from anyone. One day, around 5 p.m. in the evening, I was sighting in a new rifle scope. The sun was still up, but was going to start to fade soon, so I knew this was going to be the final test. Up until this point, nothing really happened while I was making my multiple trips downrange, other than this feeling of uneasiness. As I got downrange, I kept getting this feeling like someone or something was watching me. I looked around, but did not see anything. As I was placing stickers over my previous shots, I heard something big off to the side of me. It sounded like a large branch had snapped off a tree. Now, if you have been in the Tennessee woods, you will know that a lot of branches fall off of trees randomly out of nowhere, so this is nothing new. Except, this time, it was very loud, and sounded like fresh, strong wood, if that makes any sense. I turned and looked, but again, could not see anything. I started walking back up to my rifle, and I swear I heard someone right behind me. I turned around, but again saw nothing. As I started to walk again, I heard this deep growl. It was really deep and loud, and what's worse is that it was all around me. I turned around, facing the range, and started walking backwards. The thought of some rabid dog charging out of the bushes had me freaked out, so running was not a good idea. I slowly walked backwards, up the hill to my rifle, but nothing happened. I grabbed my rifle and spread the target with rapid fire, hoping to scare off whatever was stalking me. I left 10 rounds in the mag and grabbed my rifle bag and quickly walked back up to the house. I never told my wife about this, as I did not want to freak her out. Fast forward about a year later from when we moved in, and my niece is staying with us as a live-in nanny to earn money over summer break from college. We were on our way back from the store, and about a mile from our house, and I saw 2 eyes reflecting in the headlights, coming from a white tree on the side of the road just ahead. It had caught my attention because they were higher than a deer, but a different color and size. Just as I had said, "What is that?" and squinted, they vanished. I had made a comment that it was almost as if it had known that I could see its eyes and moved. The color was a kind of golden green, but they resembled the mannerism of a large cat, as they felt ominous. It's hard to explain, but I shrugged it off as we were passing the trees and saw nothing. A few moments later, we arrived at the house. As we were getting the bags out of my car, my 3-year-old son came bolting out of the house, excited to see me. As I was waiting to help her carry in her bags, I heard my dog growl. I looked in the direction she was looking, at my neighbor's property across the street. Now, what I saw has kept me up all night. Up until this point, I have always been skeptical, as I had never seen anything with my own 2 eyes. Even with what had happened to me the year prior, I still had my doubts that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Now, my street is kind of a spread-out neighborhood. Each house sits on several acres, and at the end of our road is Kentucky Lake, near land between the lake's recreational area. My neighbor's house sits adjacent to my house on about an acre lot. Directly in front of my house is a wall of woods, and directly behind my house is several thousand acres of untouched forest. As I was looking across the street to my neighbor's property, I saw a large, dark figure between the trees at first. The movement caught me off guard, as it looked like something big, moving quickly on all fours. Then, when it came out into clear view, it stood up and walked like a man. At first, I did not know what to make of it. It was very tall, but what was strange about it was the distance it was covering, and the fact that when it was in front of a shed, I swear, I could see through it. It was clearly walking quickly, but moving faster than any person could at a sprint. More importantly, there was no sound. It was like it was phasing in and out of reality as it moved. I said, "What the hell is that?" I realized that it was looking directly at us. It had moved at an angle away from us to minimize its time out in the open, and moving quickly as it could while still being silent. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I realized that whatever it was stalking us. I told my niece to get in the house now. I grabbed my son and booked it inside. I grabbed my AR-15 with a short scope and came back outside to see my niece still grabbing stuff out of a car. Knowing I told her firmly and clearly to get in the house, her disregard to my command annoyed me, but still, I watched over her without saying a word. As she was slowly walking, she turned towards the woods across the street from my house and suddenly bolted for the house. She ran up the steps in a panicked state. I asked her what she saw, and her face was as pale as a ghost. She said, "I heard something big in the woods walking loudly on the leaves, and when I turned toward it, I heard a deep, guttural growl." I asked her why she didn't come when I told her, and she said she thought that I was talking to my son. I told her what I had seen, and she wanted to get a closer look to see if she could see something. I told her that it was not a good idea, and she went anyway. As she was walking down the walkway, I heard the sound of dry leaves crunching in the woods across the street. I told her to stop and come take the flashlight. Now, at this point, she is about 6 feet away from my wife's SUV. As she turned and started walking back to me, I caught a glimpse of something gray and hairy bolt from behind the SUV back across the street into the woods. My porch is a raised porch, and our SUV is about 6.5 feet tall, and whatever this was, it cleared about 45 feet in what looked like a single jump. It moved like lightning. Whatever it was, it wanted my niece. It jumped behind the car out of my line of sight and was waiting for her. She still doubted my warnings and grabbed the flashlight and walked back toward the car. As she entered my driveway, she stopped dead in her tracks, leaned forward as if she could see something. I asked her what she saw. She turned and ran back up on the porch with a terrified look on her face. She said it was a figure hiding inside of a tree and that she saw its eyes. I asked her what they looked like, and all she could say was that they looked dull red at first, but as she got closer, they looked dead. I said, "What do you mean dead?" And she said that where the pupils were, they looked gray, like the way eyes would when they go blind. She said it was a really dark gray, and she swears she could see through it, almost like a dark cloud. She wanted to go out again, and took a step down the stairs, and as she did, it revealed itself from the tree. I said, "Get inside," and I went in and locked the door. It looked like a tall, human-shaped being. It was really tall and looked ominous. The next morning, we did a height comparison to the tree limb she saw it stand over, and it put its height to around 9 feet tall, and its eyes were about 6 inches apart. At this point, I don't know what this thing was. After doing some research, I think this thing was a crawler. I looked to see if there had been any other sightings in Benton County, but nothing. More importantly, I swear it would phase in and out, almost like a shadow person, but bigger and more obvious. One of the things that makes this fit is that it can communicate telepathically. This explains why everyone was hearing something that nobody else could hear. Secondly, it has a playback-like communication. So when I heard a dog panting, it was probably one of my dogs it had heard. My wife was actually hearing our son crying for help, as he had recently fell and cried for help. The baby crying will be our newborn baby, who she had given birth to recently, and it must have heard me call my wife's name, and kept telepathically calling my wife's name with my voice. Another thing that my niece had said that night was that she felt compelled to go back outside to it. She said she felt like this thing was communicating with her somehow, and it wanted her to go back outside. The more I read about this thing, the more everything that's been happening over this past year makes sense. One thing that I find extra convincing is that down the road towards the lake, there is a property that is barbed wired off and is a wall of forest with no driveway. A lot of the property down our road is undeveloped owned land, and on one of the trees there is this large old sign that says, "Screamer lives here," with an arrow pointing back into the woods. Now, I have to admit, when I first saw this sign, I laughed, thinking maybe the owner screamed at trespassers who entered his property, and teenagers put up the sign to mess with him. But when I did a satellite search of our neighborhood, that entire section of road has no houses or trails or anything, and is just pure forest as far as the eye can see. One of the things that this thing is said to do is make a loud scream when threatened. Now that you understand my story, I doubt this is the ending. The next question is, what can we do? I don't want my wife or kids to disappear one day, and if there is more than one of these things out there, this really makes the missing 411 make a whole lot of sense. I feel perplexed and scared as to what I can do. Any advice? I will try and keep this post alive with new experiences.